This book tells the story of the first of the three battles in England at Fulford during the fateful few weeks in the autumn of 1066. The book has three sections, so separate videos have been prepared to outline what is in each. There are, of course, reasons for battles, and this prelude introduces the people and the politics that led to the battle at Fulford. It also explains how two invasions, one from Norway, the other from Normandy, were organised, and more importantly, who tried to coordinate them. By the 11th century, England had been a unified kingdom for nearly 200 years, with other invasions from neighbourhoods, however, during this time. For example, in 1015, the country had been taken over by the Danes. But the line of the Wessex rulers, descended from Alfred, was restored when Edward the Confessor became king in 1042. Edward's mother, however, was a Norman, and he had spent much of his early life as an exile in Normandy. So the bloodlines of all those who sought to rule England in 1066 were thoroughly mingled. And into this mix, one needs to introduce the three leading earldoms of England, the Earls of Wessex, Mercia and Northumbria, as they had significant economic as well as military power. Very late in 1065, the Thanes, or the nobles in Northumbria, rose up to overthrow their earl. Their earl was Tostig, the younger brother of the future King of England, Harold. At the time of the revolt, however, he was away hunting with the king while his retainers were all butchered in York. The Northumbrian Thanes, after that, did not choose a replacement from the local nobility, but instead they invited the brother of the Earl of Mercia to become their earl. This meant that the two northern earldoms were united in opposition to the Wessex earldom in the south. For the ambitious Earl of Wessex, Harold Godwinson, this was a serious problem, not least because the armies of the Mercians and Northumbrians were already heading south, destroying any outpost of the Godwin family. There is so much more behind the story of Tostig's exile, which is addressed in the book. It was common knowledge that Edward was ill and that there were no child to succeed him, so a succession crisis was looming. King Edward therefore ordered Harold to take his army and restore Tostig's control in Northumbria. Harold recognised he was in a weak position and negotiated with the northern brothers, Edwin and Morcar. It is perhaps worth noting at this point that the following year, round about Easter, Harold, then the king, had married their sister. Women and their marriages were sometimes referred to as peace weavers in this era, and this seems to be a classic example. The deal Harold negotiated kept England united in 1066 to defend the island against foreign contenders. The alternative, of course, was civil war. King Edward's problem was that his marriage to the eldest daughter of the Godwinsons had not produced an heir. Edward first addressed this problem by offering the land to Normandy and its young Duke, William. To facilitate this, he engineered the exile of the whole of the Godwinson family in October 1051. But this plan was thwarted when the other earls refused to support the king and the Godwinsons returned, their power enhanced. But the king was not done. King Edward then sought out the nephew who had been exiled by King Canute. This plan also failed when Edward, known as the Exile, died soon after returning to England. One might even speculate that Edward's next plan was to advance Tostig, since just before the Godwinsons' exile, he had married Edward's niece, Judith, Countess of Flanders. Judith is going to play an important part in the events that lead to the battle at Fulford. So just before Christmas 1065, Tostig went into exile with his wife Judith, who was the Countess of Flanders. Soon after that, King Edward died. The nobles were already assembled to consecrate the king's new Westminster, and they agreed that Harold should take the throne, apparently with the dying king's blessing. Duke William was furious and demanded the throne. When rebutted, he announced his plan to invade England and set about the task of recruiting nobles to support him. In Flanders, Tostig quickly realised that his brother was ignoring him and his exile and would not be revoked and allowed to return home. Harold's marriage plan uniting the three earldoms confirmed his suspicion that he was not going to be allowed to come back to England. Therefore he began a plan to restore himself, and it was going to require a very ambitious plan. He set out, possibly as early as February, to try and raise support to enable him to return to England. In previous decades, several nobles had managed to reverse their exile with a show of force and some foreign support. Sadly, Tostig has become a historical footnote, so his travels and deeds are not very well reported. However, because he visited other kings, we do get some details of what happened. His first stop was to his cousin Sven, King of Denmark. He sensibly pointed out that King Harold was also his cousin and instead offered Tostig land and title in Denmark. Tostig was quite rude and journeyed on to see the King of Norway, Harald. Just a word of clarification here. This is Harald with an A and not Harold with an O, which was Tostig's brother. King Harold's life, that's King Harold of Norway's life, was exceptional. He had been fighting and winning for about 50 years, but he had now passed the throne to his eldest son. We read that the tyrannical Harold, who was later known as Hardrada or Hard Ruler, travelled around Norway to settle scores in his semi-retirement. This made him increasingly unpopular, and it even came close to conflict with his own son, now the co-king. It was probably only a matter of time before Harold was murdered. So the arrival of Tostig, with a plan that might re-establish Dane law in England, had some appeal. After a detailed public debate, Harold agreed to take his veteran warriors to England. He would be accompanied by his wife, a princess from Keef, and 2 daughters. This strongly suggests that they did not plan to return from their trip to England. Tostig was a clever man. He had even argued with the Pope and managed to get some decisions reversed on a visit to Rome. With the northern invasion by the Norwegians agreed, Tostig then returned to Flanders, where he learned that William's invasion plans did not have universal support. This was his chance, and it might have been at this stage that his joint venture was first proposed. His wife Judith and William's wife Matilda were like sisters. They provided a secure channel of communication between the two invaders. Matilda's father had been appointed regent of France for the underage king of that country, and he was keen to limit the expansion of Normandy, which added some political complexity to the events of 1066. Tostig now set out to raid England, placing him very near Normandy in early May. French sources report a meeting with William. Such a meeting would need to be clandestine, and it's quite possible that this took place on ships off the coast to avoid any prying eyes. What we do know is that in early June, William was able to give his assembled nobles some upbeat intelligence he said he had received from England, so the southern invasion was now on. There is really no right answer about who should succeed to the English throne in 1066. Plus, we should recognise that the political structure of Europe was changing, partly due to the resurgence of the Church of Rome as the new millennium had dawned. The rules for who should inherit thrones were evolving, with the Church getting increasingly involved. They would soon turn any rebel into a heretic. All this is explored in the opening section of 1066, the battle and its consequences. The omission of this encounter from the national narrative has allowed a lot of mythologizing about 1066. Contemporary records, and now the abundant evidence from Fulford, explains the key actions and their timings. With 5 fresh armies involved, this is arguably the biggest battle of 1066. Including the opening battle at Fulford provides an interpretation of 1066 which is significantly different from the normal narrative that ended the Anglo-Saxon rule. How we come to believe history that we are told is explored in the illustrated history. While there are plenty of facts and abundant evidence, what we believe, however, is still a matter of personal judgment, and the book sets out to give you lots of facts to formulate your opinion.